Okay, the Russians were interfering. I should be able to hear you now.
Hi, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. What's up?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a few things. So I'm currently doing a some like education master's program and stuff in IR, and there are a few things that I think might be quite interesting for you. So I'm just gonna see if you ever heard of the two level game before by Robert Putnam?
No, I'm not.
Okay. And then the second thing is that we had two conversations before about like for IR and foreign policy stuff, and specifically like tertiary sanctions and stuff like this, and value imperialism. And I thought a bit about that, and I have a stronger objection to make to your claims than I raised before there. So do you have time for this? Is this kind of in the scope of what you want to do right now, or are you busy doing other stuff?
Yeah, give me 40 seconds so I can finish this stupid glazing video, and then I can
Of
mute, okay?
course.
One
Good
sec.
luck.
Okay, I'm
How
here.
was it?
Go,
Do you
what's
feel
up?
glazed?
Yeah, so glazed.
Okay, great. Okay, so basically, the two-level game is a way to look at international negotiations, and it's called two-level because when a negotiator is negotiating something with somebody else, there's one game being played, of course, like with your fellow, like the negotiator on the other side of the table,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also a game that happens domestically, right? In terms of what would your constituency be willing to accept.
Sure.
And this is very important for your negotiations, obviously, because you can't like put forward or agree to a proposal that wouldn't be ratified by your constituency. Otherwise, you have no deal. Um, and depending on how opinionated your constituency is on a topic, you have what's called a win set. And a win set is basically like the set of agreements that your constituency would be willing to ratify. So if you have like a very opinionated, constituency that would only accept a small portion of things, you would have a small win set. And if you have a constituency that wouldn't really care, and basically anything you do on this would get passed, it's a big win set. Now, with and basically, yeah, for an agreement to be made, there needs to be some level of an overlap in the win sets of the two parties that are negotiating. Otherwise, they can never actually make an agreement that would be ratified and therefore go into effect or anything.
Okay.
So, first quiz question: what do you think this means for authoritarian states that don't have like a conventional constituency in this way?
You said the win set includes the overlapping things that you are domestically and privately willing to give? That's the overlap between those two?
When you say privately, do you mean as the negotiator?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like the win set is not necessarily an overlap. The win set is just like the scope of agreements that your constituency would be willing to ratify. That's the win set.
Okay. What does this mean for an authoritarian regime?
Yes, exactly.
Um, I mean, what does it mean for an authoritarian regime? Can you be a little bit more specific, or am I just supposed to
Yeah,
ramble and stumble
sure.
on the question? Yeah.
No, no worries. So this has to do with yeah, with the size of the win set, right? In the sense that I can move the question, put it down the line a bit later. A
The size
democracy
of the win
usually
set,
has
I would
what,
get. My
yeah.
guess would be that the size of the win set is probably a bit larger. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, exactly, for an authoritarian state. Now, do you think having a larger win set is good or bad?
I think it depends. The way that I tend to view authoritarian regimes is that, and it, like applied to this example, the larger win set is good such that you have a little bit more flexibility to negotiate, but the larger win set is bad because in a democracy, if you step outside of the win set, you're going to be voted out. In an authoritarian regime, if you step outside of the win set, you're going to be cooed or executed, would be my guess.
I think that's all true. I'm thinking more like specifically in the scope of a negotiation, and I can talk about this a bit.
Oh, in the scope of
Like you said,
negotiation,
yeah,
having a
exactly.
larger
Yeah.
win set, I think it's probably going to depend upon how much of that win set is perceptible or observed by the person that you are negotiating against. So if they perceive you as having a lot more flexibility or wider win set, that's probably worse for your negotiating position because they're going to be pushing to more of the extremes on it, would be my guess.
Yeah,
Or it could be good because
exactly.
you have more flexibility, so they're more willing to work with you because you have more flexibility. I mean, I guess it depends exactly on what they're negotiating. So, for instance, in the United States, I have a lot of perspective on what you're talking about, not using these terms, but when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and the history of that with the U.S. involvement and everything. If when a president or a Democratic leader is a lame duck, so they've been voted out, they're waiting for the next party to step in, your win set is basically non-existent. It's incredibly narrow because why would they agree with anything? You have no authority to negotiate anymore, basically. But yeah, but okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think you got to a lot of the big points there, where having a big win set might be good if the value of an agreement is very high for you.
Hmm.
Then of course having a wider win set is beneficial. But then you also mentioned the other thing where if your win set is smaller, then assuming that both parties want an agreement, that agreement is generally as a rule going to be more favorable for you, because you can just throw your hands up and be like, hey, I'm sorry, I wish I could do a more favorable deal, but like it's literally not possible. My constituency is restraining me.
Yeah.
Whereas an authoritarian state can't really say that, right? Because they can kind of do they have of course a wider win set, but not infinite, but
A little bit, yeah.
still,
I think to go along with the
exactly.
point I said earlier, I think I don't remember if it was Bashar al-Assad or if it was his father Hafez, but one of them was invited into talks with Israel, and I think they said something along the lines of like, if I participate in this conversation, I'm going to have a rifle in my back, like they're going to get shot, executed, basically, or killed. But yeah, so yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you also mentioned the other thing regarding, the importance of maybe playing the size of your win set close to your chest, right?
Hmm.
Where you want to make the opponent believe it's smaller than it is, so that they're willing to be, because they're like, okay, I still want a deal, so fine, I'll take it a bit more in your direction.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful with that, obviously, because if you exaggerate it too much, then suddenly the opponent can be like, okay, well, we have no overlap in the win set, no deal at all, and then you're like, okay, well, shit, actually, I could do something else, and then credibility's ruined, and nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah. Went for the
Okay.
Camp David talks. One of the big issues coming in, I believe, Ben Ami said one of the problems was Arafat came into that expecting to start at like 65% land swaps, and the Israeli delegation was immediately offering 80% plus. And so they were on the Palestinian side. They're like, wait, holy shit, we need to push for way more. I didn't know they were willing to offer as much. Yeah, because all of a sudden they perceived a much wider win set from their interlocutors than they had originally thought was possible. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very interesting way, I think, to look at things, and I think it's a very well respected theory. It applies to the case that you were talking about in terms of Israel Palestine,
Hmm.
but it also has a very interesting implication for disinformation and foreign interference, right?
Hmm.
Because essentially, if you're an authoritarian state, by being able to engage in opinion building and stuff like that in foreign states, in democratic states, sorry, you can actually like loosen and widen their win set, because you have a greater portion of their constituency that doesn't view you as an authoritarian state as badly, or your actions as badly, and therefore there's a greater portion of the population that would be willing to accept a more conciliatory or deal that's better for the authoritarian state, and it widens then win sets and makes the kind of negotiating position for the democratic states much worse. Because now their win set is similarly broadened, because you have more of your population that's sympathetic to these authoritarian states.
Okay.
And what's significant about this is that this type of like interference that widens the win set of democratic states, is that even if that democratic state doesn't have a head of state that is sympathetic or friendly towards the authoritarian state, right? Even if you have whatever the most steadfast liberal values and principles, whatever person that would never strike a favorable deal, it still weakens their bargaining ability, just because they know that, hey, sure, you might be like this as a head of state, but your constituency is willing to offer a lot more. So you can't, play hardball with us in the same way they used to be able to before. So yeah, it's basically, yeah, this whole two-level game can be applied to a lot of different foreign relations thing, and it gives you interesting insights into understanding, one of the many reasons why authoritarian states are so intent on foreign interference and manipulating views and stuff
Sure.
like that, because it makes their negotiating position less bad.
Sure.
Yeah, that was the piece of kind of like information where it might be interesting to think of things in the future. But the second thing I wanted to talk to you about, unless you have anything more on that, has to do with a discussion we had before about what we call value imperialism, I think,
Hmm.
where we talked about how you're quite reluctant to be heavy-handed sometimes in international like rules violations, or in terms of being able to meet commonly agreed upon like treaties or agreements, or for civil rights violations or stuff like this in the form of like sanctions and stuff like this, because you're worried essentially about the formation of a parallel system, right?
Okay. I remember the
Am I
conversation. Yeah. I don't know how I would say this 100% the best summary, but close enough. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things that is that I would like to talk to you about, because I think in the previous one we mentioned, like, for example, let's say that we have some climate agreement or some emission standards, right?
Hmm.
That we want to set, and let's say that we're in a situation then where we're like, okay, hey, if you don't like meet these certain emission standards, we're not gonna trade with you. And you put these into place, and let's say that because you're a big enough economy, a lot of states abide by it because it's cheaper for them to change their production processes and to have like more difficult trade with you. But then you have other states that are still trading with the ones that were left out and the ones that didn't abide by these regulations. Thus putting them at an advantage relative to you, where you're like, no, if you're not meeting these regulations, we won't trade with you. Whereas this other state might be like, sure, we'll meet the regulations ourselves, but we'll still trade with people that don't. So they're in a more competitive position. And then we have the question like, okay, do we want to sanction or in some way make trade more difficult with states like that, who they themselves might be abiding by whatever standard we have, but they're engaging with people that don't
Yeah, this
abide
is
by
like
that
my
standard?
blacklist versus the ultra blacklist, basically. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering correctly, you were like, I'm not at all a fan of these types of sanctions where you punish people or you punish states for their relations with other states. Was that
Yeah, or it would
correct?
have to be reserved for the most like hardcore of like norm violations, basically. Like if there was a state that had legalized rape, maybe you wouldn't want to do business with any country that did business with that country, right? I could understand that. But for things like climate emissions, regulations, all of that, I'm not sure. That's a lot harder. Yeah.
And because you said my summary was more or less accurate before, so why is that you don't want to do that, or you
Um,
you think it's difficult or whatever?
why don't I want to enforce those like sanction standards, basically?
Yeah, like secondary,
The secondary things, I mean, like, it's going to come down to the behavior that you're trying to regulate, and it's going to come down to the leverage that you have on all of the trading partners. If you become
Mhm,
overburdensome and you want to regulate too much, then your leverage is going to necessarily decrease, obviously, because you're
mhm,
cutting people off from more and more trading partners. And if behavior is too wide, then it's going to be impacting too many states such that your leverage would fall because nobody's going to realistically cut off so many other economies just to maintain relations with you, right? So you have to hold like onto some kind of balance, right?
yeah. So basically, what I'm hearing from you there is that, yeah, if you sanction too many, you lose the economic leverage that allowed you to put those sanctions in to begin with, and like, you won't be able to do it. Or if it gets too wide, then it's no longer going to be in a state's kind of like rational self-interest to abide by those standards and continue, trading with you when it's cheaper for them to keep emitting. Sure, they can't trade with you anymore, but they can trade with the rest of the world that are also not going to emit them,
Yeah.
or going to meet the standards. That's correct.
Yeah. Like let's say your economy is 10 points and you want to like ultra sanction anybody that does any business with an economy that's worth 1 point. Well, then people are probably just going to say fuck it, we're not going to trade with these people. But let's say that you want to sanction so many different countries that collectively it's like a 3 point, a 5 point, a 2 point, a 7 point, and altogether it adds up to like 30 points. Well, people are going to look at you and they're like, okay, this isn't worth it anymore. Like we're just going to do business with all these other economies and I guess we're going to lose access to the United States. And then that's a bad situation to be in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think these two arguments, I mean, these are just like descriptive things, right? It's like obviously like nobody who's on any side of this specific debate would disagree with the fact that, hey, you shouldn't do these types of sanctions if you overburden yourself, or if suddenly it's no longer in the other state's rational interest and therefore they have no interest to pursue it, right? Because
Yeah.
nobody wants to pass ineffective sanctions.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it isn't the case that like one of these two fuck ups are happening, is there any other reason why you would be opposed to it, like generally, or
I mean, there's going
are
to
these
have
the
to
main?
be some like ideological adherence to what we sanction, right? Maybe there's a 1 point economy, and we don't like the fact that their flag has too much of the color green on it. So we're going to ultra
Mhm,
sanction a country if they do business with them. I would say, well, I probably don't ideologically align with this type of sanction. There needs to be probably a compelling reason to have the sanction.
mhm,
And that's going to be like an ideological one. Yeah.
mhm. Okay, yeah. If it's for frivolous reasons, then I mean that's more subjective, but I agree, of course.
Hmm.
But we mentioned, you brought up the case of, or maybe I brought up first and then you mentioned it. I can't remember, but regardless, climate change and emissions was brought up before.
Hmm.
Assuming you could do some kind of like secondary sanction situation, where it's not like going too far to the point where you can't keep it up anymore, or it's not in the other country's economic interest to ignore your sanctions. Would you be in favor of them then?
I mean, it would just depend on what the particular sanction is, right? Yeah.
When you say that, you mean like
Or not the sanction. I'm sorry. It would
breadth of
depend on
it?
what the particular
Mhm.
regulation was that was being enforced by the sanction. Yeah.
Okay. And if it but you can imagine that there are some types of kind of climate regulation where you would be okay with secondary sanctions for.
Yeah, potentially. Like, let's say, like my understanding is that, oh God, fuck, what were the names of the things? Poly some bullshit. What was the ozone shit being caused by a lot?
Um, CFCs,
Yeah,
carbon
CFCs. Yeah,
fluorocarbons or
yeah,
something.
fluorocarbons.
Yeah.
Yeah, those I think got regulated like crazy across the world, and basically undid a lot of that damage. If there's like
Mhm.
a regulation like that is like very easily mappable onto like if we do this, it will fix this, and like it's a thing that everybody could theoretically get rid of with very little economic pain. Like these are things that I think I'd probably be okay with. But if it's a
Mhm.
thing like you need to be off of all fossil fuel by like 2030, then
Mhm.
I don't know. That's like a much harder position, and you're starting to get into that world where you're adding up so many countries you'd have to start sanctioning that people aren't going to align with you. Um, yeah. Or
Okay.
I'm sorry. But if you're just discussing my ideological thing, and we're forgetting the points or whatever, even on that, like I'm not sure how I would feel about those types of sanctions or those types of regulations. I guess
Okay. And when you say you don't know about them, would that be because of the risk of the like a parallel system arising, as you mentioned before?
That and also I'm just not sure how fair it would be, like with how much moral authority and epistemic authority you could leverage or not leverage. I'm sorry. I don't know how like based in scientific truth you could levy particular regulations towards countries with a certain degree of confidence, if that makes sense, right? Like, let's say that there's a regulation, and if every country on the world followed it, there's like a 40% chance that the deviation from temperatures could change by within 1 degree centigrade in the next 100. Like, I don't know if a change like that I feel is like ideologically strong enough to enforce on other people via regulations and then sanctions.
Okay, so you mentioned parallel system partly, but then in terms of like the fair moral authority.
Yeah, for the
Um,
parallel system, I mean, that would be a thing I'd be worried
mhm.
about too, but I'm trying to focus on that other condition I gave you, the ideological one. The parallel system would be a worrisome thing too. That's in all circumstances, basically, but yeah.
Okay, so let's say that you had a situation where it would be, it would be the following, and just say to stop other information from getting into it, we have climate policy X, and climate policy X, we understand that there is there is like a, let's say it's a 75, 80 plus percent chance that if the whole planet were to adopt and abide by it, we would see like a turning of the trend in terms of the emissions of carbon and heating to the point where maybe we wouldn't hit some of the really bad ones like 4 degrees, 3 degrees, 2 degrees, and stuff like this.
Hmm.
Even though we're well on our way already. And in terms of the things you mentioned before, it's possible for a state to abide by it because we have a lot of economic dominance kind of concentrated in uh, largely democratic states, US, the European Union, especially with their massive import market.
Yeah.
You say this regulation, you're like, hey, by the way, if you don't abide by policy X in your countries, we're going to like make trade more difficult with you. And if you trade with other people who don't do policy X, we're gonna
Yeah.
also
Like theoretically, I would be in favor of this. I mean, it would depend on,
Now
yeah.
the thing that's complicated is that okay, none of the practical concerns are triggered. Like the first two that you mentioned,
Hmm.
the ideological ones, I guess, are for you to evaluate now. The parallel system is for you to evaluate now. The fair moral authority is for you to evaluate now. But the only other piece of information would be like it's possible, it can get done. Like in the sense that it's likely that most countries will pass policy X, and you will see this positive outcome. But other countries aren't very happy about it, obviously, seeing this as an infringement on their national sovereignty, on U.S. EU waving around their trade and economic prosperity in a way to kind of influence other countries and their domestic policies. And like, yeah, that's something that's going on as a result of it. What do you think?
I mean, you would have to take into account like what the world climate is and how well you think you can make these arguments and how important that particular outcome is. So, like, if this was 2015 and everyone in Europe was getting ass pained over a lot of the refugees that were coming from Europe, this is probably not the time where you'd step into Europe and be like, "Hey, guys, also you're going to do this." But like, if there's like relative peace and you've got a little bit more political leverage or capital, let's say the U.S. was successful, they helped Ukraine completely kick out Russia, energy prices go back to normal. You're like, "Hey, also we're going to do this thing for climate change." Like, that might be Like, okay, so I think it would depend on the rest of the climate because now you're in questions of like how much political capital do you want to expend to get this particular thing done? Yeah.
Okay, and your concerns about it not being the right time with the world is in peace makes more sense. I think the political capital sense, the political capital argument makes a lot of sense. Like if you have potentially a more like high yield in terms of whatever humanitarian benefit you can get, it might make more sense to spend more political capital on that. 100% with you there. But when you talked about it like not being the right time, I didn't exactly follow the EU migration example that you brought about.
Well, like
Can you?
a lot of Europe got started to get really upset after 2013 with the Syrian refugee crisis. So like maybe
Yeah.
the stressing of the systems there wouldn't be the best time to also say, hey, let's do let's also like start to make energy more expensive or something, right?
Okay, so
Yeah.
so for somebody to tell the okay, I get what you mean.
Hmm.
Um, okay. Uh, 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 uh. So yeah, I mean, okay. So there seems to be m mostly still like the political capital arguments. But the and the risk of the parallel system, that's not really something that's
I mean that's always like a
not
thing
really-
that's like playing in the background, right? Like if the political capital you have to expend would be too high, well, you probably wouldn't be able to get it done.
okay.
But I mean like these things are always kind of all at play at the same time, right?
Okay, yeah, that's true. And maybe I got a much stronger impression that you were concerned about more of a kind of national sovereignty concern, overstepping, concerns, the risk of parallel system concerns prior, because I prepared like a little bit on that argument specifically, where I mean the bulk of the argument is essentially that, at the moment we have a relative amount of time sensitivity where you see that, well, we'll see what happens now in the U.S., but the U.S. and the EU have a lot of very important economic power that, and this is a well-studied thing, in the EU perspective, at least from something that's known as the Brussels effect, have the power to essentially be able to regulate across their borders by setting certain standards and stuff like this for access to the EU import market. And at the moment where we have this like kind of dominance in terms of economics in the hands of liberal democracies, it feels like it's not the appropriate action to take to be worried about a parallel system arising and therefore not take advantage of this awesome like norm setting and regulatory tool that we have at our disposal right now
Can you
because we're worried about the risk of a parallel
yeah, can
system.
you
Yeah.
ground this out in an example for me, or like give me something you're like concrete that we're talking about right now?
Um, in terms of a hypothetical
Like
example or
something,
like a
yeah, that you
real
think we
example?
should be like pushing for right now, I guess.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of this has to do with the climate point specifically. I know the EU is kind of already going in that direction a bit with something a relatively new proposal called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which basically makes it so that EU importers need to essentially like pay a fee or take into consideration the amount of carbon that was emitted in the production of the goods that they're importing, therefore
Do you think that
making.
like right now with energy being so high across Europe, with because the war is still going on and everything else, and then all the inflation everybody's experiencing, do you really think there's a lot of leverage there for something like that right now?
Um, when you say a lot of leverage, do I think it could be done, or do I think it's worth spending
Could it
like
even,
political
I
capital
guess,
on?
could it even be done, or if it was done, would it come at a catastrophic cost to like all of the incumbents got like roasted this election cycle because of the inflation and everything? Like it feels like you would just be contributing more to that, and then whatever party is like trying to enact these things is like paying an even greater price for trying to do so.
So I think that there are two directions I can interpret that. The first one is that there are maybe like more significant things to focus on now, which I don't think is the case when we take into consideration all the negative effects that come with not taking a lot of the climate stuff very seriously. But your second argument is essentially that okay, if this is done now, whatever this is progressed for 2 4 years, whatever, a new government comes in and it's like, okay, fuck all this, and gets rid of it, and therefore you got literally nothing done, and it was immediately reversed. Is
Hmm.
that is it the second point that you're
Yeah,
making
it'd
more?
be like immediately reversed, and I don't even know if you could get it done, and it would just hurt you electorally, and yeah.
No, I think this is true. What I'm specific and like obviously if it's a situation where if you do it, it's not going to do anything because it's going to be reversed in 2 or 4 years, and then you have a bunch of other shitty policies being passed. I agree that it's not a good thing, but talking now specifically with regard to the risk of parallel systems coming up. as the major objection, and why I don't think that that is a good objection.
Sure. I don't know if that would be, if enough people would block it or whatever, because you do have like the leverage, like internationally. If it were start to pass, I think you would still have to play ball with all the big systems that currently exist, right?
Yeah, so what I remember you talking more about is this, like, okay, if we keep exerting this, whatever, you will have a BRICS, Russia, China, essentially developing their own, complete like supply chains for everything, and an economic area of influence. And because we overstepped, now the world is going to move away from that essentially. And now we're in a really bad position in the future where we have no leverage at all because we overstepped in this one situation.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if that would be the concern here.
Okay. Okay,
Like, I
interesting.
think the concern here is I don't even know if domestically if you could get your population on board with these things before you even hit the international stage.
Hmm. Okay. Mhm. Okay, because now do you think that your opinion on this has changed at all since last time we spoke?
Um, no, I don't think so.
Okay. Um,
But I mean, there's
so
going to
I
be like
think
varying levels of concern based on like different like levels of what we're talking about, right? Um,
yeah.
like if you don't even have domestic support for a thing that if you could pass domestically, it would lead to like everybody falling in line with it. You would have to. It's not that you've like abandoned the argument of like alternate systems popping up. It's that you wouldn't domestically even have the support for it, or if it was to get passed, it'd be basically redone or like immediately once the next party comes in. I mean, like the domestic hurdle of even having support for a given thing. I think that's kind of assumed when you say like, oh, like, would you enforce your policies on another country? We kind of assume baked into that answer that we have the domestic support for that thing, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm mistaken, I remember us talking last time. I think the example then was regarding like I think it was like rights for gay people, and we discussed. I think it was a relatively recent, no, not relative, I don't know, but it was like a U.S. sanction for a country that had like the criminalization of homosexuality, essentially.
Sure.
And I remember that you applied you were like, okay, well, you know. I don't think it makes as much sense to leverage the government to do something about that as it would if it was happening in my local community or my local country.
Yeah, correct.
Mhm. And the reason for that was, from your perspective.
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah, yeah, I'm asking you.
Um, I don't remember what we were talking about last time, but my guess is
Mhm.
last time I was saying there's probably some like subset of values that I think are really important for my country that I wouldn't necessarily want us enforcing on other people. So things related to like our freedom of the press or freedom of speech or rights for LGBT people that I think are important for my country. I don't know if I would necessarily enforce that on to other countries. And then there's going to be some subset of things that I think should probably be enforced on other countries. Things like customary international law, like you can't legalize like rape or murder or torture, stuff like that.
Okay, and this is because you don't think it's sufficiently bad?
Um, I think that there probably should be some autonomy granted to other countries to make decisions that we could have like certain types of disagreements on. Like, I don't know if I feel like it's like a codified moral truth that like LGBT people should have the exact same rights as straight people, I guess, throughout all of societies. I don't know if I feel strongly enough to say like this should be a right that's like codified across the entire world, maybe, or maybe it would be. I don't have to think in regards to that particular thing, but there's going to be some category of things where I'm probably going to say like I think this is important for the U.S. I don't know if I would say the same for other people. Like I'm glad that we don't have like hate speech laws in the United States, but if other countries wanted to have hate speech laws, I don't know if I would say hate speech laws are so bad that like we should invade or sanction other people that have them.
Okay, and the question here is that because you think that actually hate speech laws in your local context might actually be appropriate and might result in more net good, and because I don't know what your local situation is like, I'm going to refrain from doing it? Or is that because you think that, hey, even though I think that your hate speech laws are actively, causing harm and you'd be better off without them, I still don't think it would be good for me to kind of like coerce you into adopting them?
I think it's almost values principle based, like deontological. Like these are just things that I think are important to Americans. I don't know if I would necessarily say every country should have these exact same values. So I don't know if I would enforce the exact same values on every country.
Okay.
Like I feel like the alternative is
Uh,
like, would you force every single country to adopt a constitution that was identical to your own?
um,
Would
So when you say I think in terms of that specific question, there are all sorts of things that could come up with it. But would I say that, hey, I think the world would clearly be in a better space if all countries had a constitution, like assuming like I agreed with my country's constitution, of course. My answer to that would be clearly yes, and I think that within proportionality, it makes sense to pursue that. But my opposition to like maybe pursuing it in certain instances doesn't stem from like a deontological like a sovereignty issue or anything like that, but it would stem more from like thinking in long term effectiveness, managing antagonisms, political capital objections, and stuff like this.
okay.
And it sounds like you have a like more of a deontological thing on this.
Yeah, I just think values based. I don't know if every country should necessarily needs to be the exact same values as every other country. Like I said, I'm sure there are some broad things that we should agree on, but I'm sure there's like space to have disagreements on other things. Like even in the U.S., like different states have different laws or regulations around certain things, like drug legalization and whatnot. So
Okay. So to go back to the question I asked before, is it like you don't know what effects it will have, or you think the effects will be good, but you're
I'm not
still
even
not in
thinking.
favor?
Yeah, I'm not even thinking of the
Yeah.
effects. I'm just thinking of like where are the people at, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Do you apply this way of thinking to any other component of your ethical system?
Possibly. Yeah. I would need an example, I guess.
No, I mean I'm asking I'm asking you because from my understanding, um, you generally seem to be more of a utilitarian and consequentialist thinker than a deontological one, which is why this is so surprising and interesting to me, I guess.
I guess I'm
Um,
on the virtue ethics train right now. Okay, fuck all the other
oh,
normative
fuck,
systems. Yeah,
Jesus
because
Christ.
both of them are cringe and everything is cringe.
Okay, I can't tell if that's
That is
a meme answer
serious.
to get out of
Meta
answering it
anything
or
is
something that.
cringe and lame. So meta ethics is lame, and then also normative ethics is also cringe and lame. So we just do virtue ethics because that's cucked. And then I just talk about applied shit. So fuck it.
Okay. Uh,
There might be things like, for instance, I don't think
mm,
that you should I don't think you should shout at your kids, right? But I don't know if I would make that a law for a neighboring household. But I might agree that in my family we don't like scream at our kids, something like that, right? That would be an example, I guess, of a different set of norms for me and the people living next to me.
um, yeah. So the question is then, like for me, when I look at that question, is that should whatever my neighbors be allowed to shout at their kids? To me, it's like, what, I might have my own standards for my own household, but does it make sense to on a community level to have some kind of like a mechanism against like yelling at your kids in terms of whatever the outcomes or stuff like this? And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think one of
generally,
the great I think one of the great benefits of liberalism is that it allows for a lot of different types of things that it can be subsumed underneath it. Do you think it would be a good society
yeah,
if the
but
exact same moral norms were enforced on everybody?
no, but here's why I think that. So I agree with you that having some wiggle room is good, but the reason why I think that it's good is because I think that like a society in which every, minutia of your behavior and your well-being and stuff like this, and the way you go about your day-to-day life is regulated, is one that results in worse consequences, whatever. The risks of overregulation in general, the amount that it slows down your government systems, the amount of antagonism that creates between a government and its people, the fact that effective policy making
Sure, but
for things that
assuming
are
you
as minutiae.
could
Yeah, right.
cyberpunk perfectly top-down regulate it, you would say that every single person on the planet should be held to the exact same moral system and moral norms.
Assuming that I could flip a switch and suddenly everyone in the world acted in accordance with my moral principles, yeah, absolutely. That's why I hold those moral principles, because I think that my moral system is not like rooted in any type of like well, on some level it is, sure, but like egocentrism, that, oh, this is only good because it's in my community, but I think this is good because this is good for humans. So yeah, of course I would push
Okay.
that switch. Would you not?
No, I think it requires me to have So like for instance, like would I say that like every single person on the planet shouldn't be religious anymore? I feel like I would have to have some acceptance of wiggle room for other types of beliefs for people. I guess maybe like in an ultra perfect world, yeah, everybody would have the exact same. But I mean, given the world we have now, like not everybody's going to agree on things. So the only way that it works is if people have an acceptance for other people to have disagreements. And if you lose those abilities to accept people with different beliefs or ideas, then there is going to become conflict where one side has to win and one side has to lose, as opposed to having a system that can kind of assimilate both into the same one, into the same system.
Okay, because that answer to me doesn't sound deontological, right? Because, you know, if it was like a deontological principle, then it doesn't matter if it's a perfect world. It's this is still like a principle you hold. So it sounds like we're actually more aligned where you're like, oh, actually the reason why I think the wiggle room is good, and I agree with you here, is because there will be conflict otherwise. Um,
Okay,
but
sure.
but but now this sounds like, you know, if we go back to the point about whatever sanctions or stuff like this for a lack of civil rights for gay people. So the reason why you would oppose that would be the fact that you think that if you regulate or if you try to enforce norms on such a level, there would be like a risk of a conflict, and that would
Yeah, I
result in
think you
more
would.
harm.
I think you would fuck up on all three levels. One, I don't think you could even muster domestic support for that because we don't even have that. I don't know if that's 100% solved domestically in the U.S. yet, although we're getting close to it. Two, I don't think we would have the international support for it. I don't think other countries would be happy with us doing it. And then three, I don't even know if we could enforce that or if people would start to leave like U.S. leadership en masse because they're like, okay, well, these types of like moral enforcements are not okay. I'm just not sure in regards to that. I think it would fail on almost every level.
Okay, but practical concerns aside, if you could do it, and you know you could do it, like, would you?
Maybe I don't know. I'd have to consider it. I've never. That's such a out there hypothetical question. I haven't even really thought of that before.
Okay, but then this would be like, I mean, I can imagine that there are probably plenty of you know, things like this that maybe aren't as much in the cultural conversation or whatever, where there could be some form of like a norm enforcement that you could get domestic and international support for. And I think largely this is one of the things that the Bretton Woods systems was able to do with good effectiveness. And I think in those situations, I think you need to know that, okay, you know, assuming that there is the support and the feasibility of something, are we okay with doing it? Is that an ethical thing to do?
Possibly, but again, this is
Um,
like we're so hypothetically in like different worlds. I would have to be like pretty grounded out in a thing and then see how I think it would play out domestically, internationally, and everything else before I even begin to. Yeah,
okay, so you're hesitant to develop like a general view
I
on
just haven't
this.
even thought about it. It's just not. Yeah, not something I've even dove into a ton right now.
Okay, okay, this makes me uh, feel better about the previous answers, because now it seems like, okay, it's not like a deontological thing. It is
I don't
rooted
think of
in
anything in like consequentialist or deontological terms anymore. Like I'm not a strict adherent to either one of those things. Like wholly, yeah, I'm going to be looking at it. I think from a slightly different perspective. So I might give one type of normative take on another, a different type of normative take on another thing, but it's not gonna be like, oh, but you were consequential here, whatever. Like I don't know if I view anything strictly through those lenses anymore. So
Okay. And in terms of you worrying about like when you say that there will be there will be like a conflict, or there's a risk of conflict if you do this, are these all just like conflicts that would destroy feasibility, and therefore it doesn't make sense to do it
I
because
think
you
it's
can't
super.
do it?
I think it depends on the conflict and it depends on the thing you're fighting for. Um, like there's obviously there's huge conflict with the colonies breaking off from Great Britain, such that it's like existential because there was a war over the independence. But like that was
Mhm.
probably a war worth fighting. Um, but like there might be other conflicts where that war is not worth fighting, or the payoff wouldn't necessarily even be worth the conflict, even if you did. Like I don't know, it would depend on the thing.
Okay. So like let's say the gay tariff sanctions thing, whatever.
Yeah.
Assuming you could do it and it was feasible to do,
Then maybe
and
possibly that it's just like
frustration,
these
but
questions are
yeah.
it's so many variables at play that the hypothetical basically solves for everything, and then like the answer I think is just not worth exploring. Like we're saying like hypothetically, let's say that we could get
That,
all the
yeah.
domestic support for a particular thing, and then all of the support for
Mhm.
our allies for a particular thing, and then we could create a
Mhm.
policy that we can enforce on. Like once if you had like every single thing like that solved, then it's like okay, yeah, I guess sure, yeah, do it. Yeah, if you can enforce like LGBT stuff around the entire
Well,
world with no negative outcomes, then yeah, sure, fuck it, go for it. But
I
like
mean,
yeah.
there is like a popular like belief system that is just like, no, even if you can do it and you have the support to do it and it will result in maybe more utility or more well-being amongst the people, you still shouldn't do it
That's
out of.
possible, but I think either those
Okay,
people are
that's
boring.
what I'm checking
Sure,
for.
those people are either boring to talk to, or if you really push them, you would find out that the reasons why they're opposed to it is because they do believe, even if they say that they wouldn't care about if it resulted in a greater world, if you kept pushing them, they would find ways that it would result in like a lesser world or something. You would just have to push them a lot on it. Like, oh, what if we could snap our fingers and have a global language? They'd say no. It's like, well, what if it made everything easier? Well, they'd say, well, even if it made everything easier, no. It's like, well, what do you mean? Why not? And if you push them, they'd be like, well, having different languages like enriches the world and it gives us a history of like different cultures and all this. So, okay, so there is some utility that you're pointing towards. It's just you're measuring a different thing than just ease of communication. That's what I feel like. So, but
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the main thing that I was testing for. So you're yeah, mostly focused on practicalities and virtue ethics now, I see.
yeah, I guess, yeah.
Uh,
When you talk about like international anything, there's like so many levels of practicality that come into play before we get into like hypothetical, like pure normative ethical, I think, evaluations. But yeah.
yeah, no, I see what you mean, and the general point is that this conversation is a lot complicated, obviously, because of US's yeah, Trump's re-election, but you know I really feel like the US and the EU, we've been sitting on so much like amazing uh, economic influence and the ability to influence like a lot of things from all across the world, kind of unilaterally, without going through any kind of international organization or whatever. And that the timer on that is slowly growing out as kind of like Western hegemony or whatever falls more and more. And it frustrates me that when the possibility or the idea of bringing this up, yeah, this is brought up. Even things that have already been done, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism that I mentioned before, or whatever. There is this huge kind of pushback against it and advocacy against it on the basis of these kind of like national sovereignty concerns and other issues. That I think it's. Yeah, I think if you're worried about that or the parallel system, I think you have quite a high burden to meet in terms of demonstrating that or that it wouldn't happen anyway or whatever before you argue against, using the influence that you have as it like slowly diminishes. But especially when we have critical issues like climate change right on the border.
Sure.
But yeah,
Okay.
that was the main thing. All right. Well, I think that's everything I've got. So continue the Glaze Fest, I guess you were doing, or
All right. Well, yeah, I love you. Be careful, buddy.
love you too. Bye bye.